I'm really excited. I want to welcome Dr. Anna Ross to the microphone today. She's a lecturer at the School of Health and Social Sciences at the Edinburgh University in Scotland. She has over 20 years experience of practitioner work with substance use, is passionate about the human rights-based approaches to drug regulation, and the developing research around cannabis and psychedelics. She's also one of the founders of the Scottish Psychedelic Research Group. Dr. Anna, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First, how did the Scottish Psychedelic Research Group get started? What was the mission? Why did y'all do it?
So it's a wee bit of a roundabout story, but basically myself and a colleague of mine, Fiona Gilbertson, who runs an organisation called Recovering Justice, which focuses on the wider sort of institutional injustice of the drug war, and also works with recovery communities and sort of working on quite a grassroots level. And I was doing my PhD at the time. I was doing my PhD at the University of Edinburgh my PhD was sociology and social policy. So I looked at ways that drug users could be involved in drug policy in Scotland. So I don't really know how it works in America, but in Scotland, we've got a devolved parliament. And within that, there's quite a lot of involvement of stakeholders in the development of policy. So in the development of government policy. And particularly within the drug movement or the harm reduction and the recovery movement, there's a real emphasis on involving stakeholders and substance users or people who are affected by drugs. And I was really exploring ways in which they do this through a deliberative dialogue. So really trying to create spaces where we had multiple people together. And I was also working really heavily with sort of my community. So I identify as a lived and living experience researcher. I come from the sort of 90s rave scene, and then sort of going on early noughties. I have a sort of a colourful journey, I guess, that we can get into over the course of our conversation. But long story short, I was doing a lot of activist work and a lot of public engagement work around predominantly sort of the recovery community, and starting to look at psychedelics as something that could support the recovery community. And I was like, why can't I get paid to do this? This is ridiculous. And I saw the Open Society Foundation. They used to have this drugs policy program or drug development program. I can't remember exactly. It's closed down now. And I approached them and I got a call with somebody and just went, I'm a single mum, I'm on my own. I'm really passionate. I'm actively involved in these groups, but I just don't have, I can't have the time to do it because I'm not getting paid to do it. So I filled out a funding application form and they gave us they gave me and Fiona through the Recovering Justice an initial amount of money to work with people in recovery and looking at alternative methods and solutions. And then we got a following bit of funding just as they were closing down that program to support us in really trying to get some proper movement going in Scotland around psychedelics and cannabis. And from that, we spent sort of 2 to 3 years developing two organisations, one called the Scottish Cannabis Consortium and one called the Scottish Psychedelic Research Group. The Scottish Cannabis Consortium ultimately set up the cross-party on medicinal cannabis, and that's still running, but I've stepped down as secretary. I was secretary on that for a while, and that's still ongoing, although cannabis is a different matter. We won't talk about that just now. But the Scottish Psychedelic Research Group set up in 2022, and that was predominantly to bring the grassroots organisations into research, because what we were feeling is what we were seeing was that the experience of psychedelics was becoming medicalized, that research was becoming institutionalized. It was all following a medical model and coming from a lived and living experience, coming from Scotland in particular, where, mushrooms have been part of our our social life, for however long. We wanted to counter that. And we wanted to do research which was broader, more sociological, social policy, sort of anthropological, but also held the same weight. So bringing in the clinicians as well and bringing in the government and policymakers and people like that. So that's really what we did for the first 2 years, because we also followed this idea of, you need to get people interested and excited in this. So that funding also paid for us to put on a series of events. So we put on a 3-day festival. It was called a celebration of Scotland's Indigenous Apothecary.
Yes.
And we held 3 days in the Scottish Parliament. There, I can go into more depth with that.
I want to ask you about that in particular because
Yes.
what is the, from a standpoint of history, what is the lineage of psychoactive compounds in Scotland hundreds of years ago? I mean, what psychoactive plants are indigenous to Scotland?
So the magic mushroom, so the Liberty cap is indigenous to Scotland, as far as we know. I mean, the problem we have with the Liberty cap is that we don't have any written records of it existing, let alone, well, no, it is existing, but we don't have any written records of it being used prior to the sort of resurgence, I would call it, in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. However, we have a long sort of written and oral knowledge and written knowledge of the Amanita muscaria, whatever it's called. I always get that bit wrong.
Yeah,
that's obviously not a psychoactive, it's a dissociative, but we also have cannabis. I don't know if you could say that cannabis is indigenous as such. I guess, this term indigenous is also one that we're trying to challenge as well, because I think it's very different for Americans and for Scots. So, and for wider, because in Scotland, we have a focus more on the land. You do get your wee kind of Scots that, white Scottish people for a white Scotland, but generally speaking, there's a phrase in Scotland called "we're all Jock Tamson's bairns." Okay. Meaning we all come from the same place. So our sense of indigenous is more about what is used by the people at that time, So if, you could be born somewhere else and come to Scotland and you would still be considered Scottish by many people once you've lived here and worked here and stuff like that. So we wanted to kind of reclaim the idea, but also, I mean, we have henbane, we have mugwort, which we found out was our own MOI inhibitor.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Know about that.
Yeah.
And Amanita. So those are really the things. But using the term indigenous, apothecary, was a very deliberate phrasing, because we're talking about apothecary, which is the tools that we have to heal. And indigenous really sort of means of the land, of the, and that's what we're talking about really. Yeah. So it's not about the people so much. It's about the plants and the practice. Yeah.
Exactly. Forgive me if I jump around a little bit, but there's so many things I want to ask you about. In Scotland, are there any ongoing research projects or clinical trials underway for psychedelics?
So this is one of the reasons why we set up the SPRG as well, because there is nothing, there was nothing going on in Scotland. There's been this sort of renaissance, as we call it. Yeah. And a lot of the universities, particularly in America and in south of England, have, you've got Imperial College that was really leading it now. Now actually King's College and Exeter seem to be the guys that are getting most of the funding for it. But it hasn't really come up north. And I found that a bit odd. I've been doing this now for 2026, so 10 years, focused on psychedelics at least. Previously to that, it was some more sort of wider drugs policy. And it's still difficult to garner sort of interest in the clinical sciences. So no, we don't have any clinical trials going on. We nearly had a couple. We nearly had a ketamine trial taking place in one of our Forth Valley areas. We nearly had a compass trial. I don't know if you've come across compass.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that we nearly had a compass trial in Scotland because they're doing a stage 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm actually quite glad. So that fell through. I hope my colleague Donald McIntyre doesn't hear me saying this, but I'm actually quite glad that it has fallen through, because what Compass are trying to do is they're trying to tie up the whole psychedelic arena in the NHS. So we've got the National Health Service here. For many of your listeners in America, we have nationally funded health systems. So, but any treatment that is delivered free of charge by the NHS has to go through very rigorous testing and trials, which cost millions of pounds.
Absolutely.
So it's very difficult for smaller organizations to do that. So Compass, and also you can't patent psilocin, or psilocybin. So So they have to try and somehow get a hold on the actual protocol.
Yeah. There's a big debate in the U.S. concerning that exact issue. So that is a big thing here. Okay, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to cover a lot with you.
Yeah, let's go.
How strong is the underground movement in psychedelic use? And what compounds are, being used?
Yeah, I mean, it's big. Psychedelic movement's big. It's been going on, ever since I was a teenager. There's. But when we say underground, what do we mean by underground?
Yeah.
Because when you say underground, I think the people using psychedelics for fun, for recreation, for healing. But
That's what I'm talking about. Non-medical, but there really is no clinical or medical.
Yeah. So what's emerged in the last sort of 5 years? So up until about sort of 5 to 6 years ago, the majority of psychedelics were being done in after parties or groups of pals getting together, and it was very normal, of a sort of an evening to take them, you prepare, things like that. Yeah. It's only really been in the last 5 to 10 years, but definitely the last 5 years, there's been a massive sort of increase in what you would call this more therapeutic healing. So a lot of people now going to small therapeutic spaces in somebody's house or somebody's garden, or, a community hall that's been rented for a yoga retreat, and being delivered by usually non-practicing counselors or therapists, so people who have gone to Peru or things like that. So that is actually, I would say every weekend. So you've got a population of 5 million people here, and I would say every weekend you've probably got about 5 to 10, official underground retreats around.
Yeah,
I'm saying I probably
word of mouth. People hear about them.
Word of mouth, yeah.
Tribes, travel.
Yeah, but actually, psychedelics are mainly more used for fun here. That's the main use.
Well, and nothing wrong with fun, nothing wrong with dancing, right? But what psychedelics are we talking about?
So traditionally Scottish, it's the magic mushrooms. We've just had our season here just now, actually, and it's been bumper, absolutely bumper.
For the Liberty caps, are you talking?
Yeah, the Liberty caps, yes.
They're small. I've never seen one.
Yes, they're these tiny little Liberty caps. And it's fascinating because actually I grew up on Liberty caps. I'd never had any of the other ones before. Mm-hmm. And then it was only in the last few years that I've tried the different kinds. And it turns out the Liberty caps are a different kettle of fish altogether. Really? They're 1.5 to 2 times stronger than regular mushrooms. They also have a very cheeky edge. Cheeky edge. It's possible to take them and just laugh your tits off for 6 hours.
Really?
You don't have to go into this deep, meaningful experience. Uh-huh. So they're very different. So that's the main one. I'd say it's a veritable smorgasbord. But it's mainly Liberty caps. We've got really quite a growing scene of people growing mushrooms now. So there's quite a lot of various, growing mushrooms. But also at the moment, ketamine. But I don't class ketamine as a psychedelic. But ketamine is,
I know there's, some really, and ketamine is used a lot off-label, above ground here in the U.S. Yep. It's a money maker for clinics and things like that. And it seems to be very effective for treatment-resistant depression, things like that. I don't particularly, I've never, I guess when I've had some medical procedures done, I was given ketamine, but, it has abuse potential.
Yeah. And it's also got a toxicity to the body. Well, and another thing is that we're finding. So I've been hearing reports from integration groups because we now have a legal ketamine clinic in Scotland. It's called ULAS Ketamine Clinic. I worked closely with them to do a pre-evaluability assessment. They're lovely guys. It's private, it's small.
Yeah, I think I've read about them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're great. But they've got, they've got patients going to sort of integration groups and things like that, and sort of people feeding back that. It's just that the experience of ketamine is very different from the experience of LSD or psilocybin, and it kind of misses that mystical vibe as well, which is
I'm glad you mentioned so mushrooms kind of in the quote underground, but what about LSD? Is there much LSD available in Scotland?
There is a fair amount. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've got this in America, but there's quite a large sort of underground scene via sort of apps like Telegram and Signal. So there's a lot of people now just selling, they'll be selling, LSD acid, MDMA pills, or ecstasy tablets and MDMA. They'll have a range of everything, including mushrooms. It usually tends to be LSD, 2CB, ketamine, MDMA, and then a range of different kind of magic mushrooms.
What about DMT? Do you see any DMT?
DMT vapes as well. DMT coming in, and DMT vapes are a big one as well.
Yeah. And, in 2025, the giant publicity, certainly in the U.S., is around ibogaine, which is
that's not really.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not. I mean,
it's a different kettle of fish. Different kettle of fish altogether. Yeah.
It's not really taken off here, but I think it's more because it's, I think once the recovery movement maybe starts to get into it, because it's a pretty hardcore substance. I mean, that's the thing as well. It's like, the thing is, these substances that are being sold, people are not taking these to heal. I mean, they are, but they're also taking them to have a good time.
And ibogaine is not for a good time. No, it's not. Yeah.
I was going to say ayahuasca. I mean, I don't understand how people take it for shits and giggles. I mean, maybe shits, but I'm not sure about giggles.
That's true. Well, and before we move on, let's mention one other thing that a lot of people here in the U.S. always ask about, and they say, well, I did it one time, I'll never do it again. And that's salvia.
Ah, yes.
Which, I'm actually writing a book about salvia right now. It's a fascinating drug, most potent naturally occurring compound on Earth. Yeah. It is not on the U.S. federal government's controlled substances list. And most people bought these extracts are incredibly strong and basically took an overdose. So it's interesting. Okay, regulatory legal status in Scotland. Is anything legal?
No. So
what about cannabis? How about cannabis?
Cannabis is only legal if it's prescribed by a consultant on the general registrars. Mm-hmm. So we've got this wonderful little alchemy that happens. When somebody pays money, cannabis changes from being a toxic non-medicinal drug to a medicinal drug. But no, unfortunately, I mean, we had a little trick in our law. So up until 2005, it was technically legal to pick magic mushrooms. Because basically it was processed mushrooms that were made illegal. That loophole was closed in 2005. So no, mushrooms are a Class A substance and a Schedule 1, so no therapeutic or medicinal benefit. There's been a lot of campaigns to try and get that rescheduled. Drug Science, for example, David Nutt's an organization. Yeah, he's they've been campaigning regularly to get that changed. There was every year or every couple of years, there's like, ooh, they're just about to change it.
I know.
They haven't.
I know. We've had that.
I know. But what has happened is, I think it's the MHRA. It's not the ACMD. So that's the Medical Health Research Association, or MHRA, the guys who issue licenses for research, and have said that anyone who's applying for licenses to research psychedelics or psilocybin will be treated as a Schedule 2 licensing. And that's basically them, I guess, recognizing that they're getting an increase of applications for psychedelic research and but the government are not catching up. They're not interested in changing anything just now. So
here in the States, it's mainly a state by state. Some states, totally illegal cannabis. Other states, you have to have a medical card. Other states, medical and what they call recreational. You go to the dispensary, kind of buy anything you want. So it's kind of all over the thing. The work the Imperial College has done, it's kind of in some ways the cutting edge, especially around things. Have you ever done DMT?
Yes.
What do you think about DMT?
What do I think about DMT? My personal opinion is it's an incredibly powerful substance that, used correctly, can give you a full-blown non-dual awakening and make you a better person all around. When I did it, twice, the first time it was quite mild. I had what I could only describe as 12 years or actually that's a bit exaggeration, 5 years of Jungian therapy in 5 minutes.
Very common.
But that's because I already had those frameworks in place.
Exactly.
And I also did some smoked stuff when I was going through a very intense awakening thing. I had a deeply mystical experience. However, I have also tried one of these DMT vapes that is not very strong. And it was just really weird. It made everything feel like I was it made everything grid-like.
Yes.
And I just, and that combined with the knowledge that particularly in Scotland and Northern England, DMT vapes are beginning to replace opiates, or maybe not even replace them, but certainly come alongside opiate use.
Yes.
And then I just was like, oh my God, if somebody used this all the time and they didn't have a strong sense of self and a strong grounding in reality, in physical material reality, it could be very easy for that person to slip into some kind of deep, I guess what you could call psychosis, which is that, you know, they don't know what's real, they don't know what's, you know, like, so I've got concerns about the use of DMT.
Well, and I do too. And you know, I've certainly had friends and known people that whether it's DMT or LSD or whatever, they can go into what's more or less called an ontological shock.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And a period of dis or unrealization for some period of time.
Well, yes. I mean, I had 2 tokes and came away understanding that there is no meaning, that there is no meaning to anything, because actually there is nothing. Right. But that preceded then, that was preceded by then a couple of years of me struggling with effectively nihilism. You know? Sure. So you're right. And this is somebody, I've got a very deep grounding in the sense of self, and very well read in multiple different spiritual frameworks, you know, so I really do. In fact, ontological shock is something that I really want to work quite a lot with. And it's actually what I'm working with within the research. So we hadn't really got onto that with the SPRG research, but the stuff that I'm doing at the moment is called Communitas, Ritual and Recovery. And it's trying to basically bring in the clinicians, with the facilitators, with the lived experience, with the community builders, with the songwriters, you know, all these different people together to understand. But the big thing is that with the clinical psychiatrists, they're not really understanding this ontological shock thing, because they don't, if they haven't used it and don't understand what it does to you.
Yes.
They can't really understand how somebody can go in an atheist and come out believing in God. You know, they just see it as, oh, that's a good mark, and the longer they're getting better. So so there's a difficult tension there with the language of psychiatry and even psychology that is getting used within psychological within treatment, but the language of divinity and the language of sort of all I can say is the language of divinity is missing.
You know, the big movement here in the U.S. Organized to try and push forward some type of regulation or legalization was an organization called MAPS, founded in 1985, to get first MDMA legalized. And their approach was, it was the Trojan horse approach. We can prove it'll cure these particular diseases, and we can get government approval for that. And then we'll use it for everything else, creativity, consciousness expansion, whatever else. Of course, that was turned down by the government a couple of years ago, but, you know, we'll see. But on a state-by-state basis, certainly Oregon and Colorado and soon New Mexico have really opened things up. And so there's a very active, is more of a bubble, I think, of retreat centers in the U.S., in Jamaica, and in Mexico.
Right.
And there is definitely potential for harm in those, because they're totally unregulated. A lot of people have a good heart who are involved with it, but some people don't. And it is a petri dish of good and bad bacteria. So, you know, these are such powerful compounds. The effect they have on consciousness. I'm not saying they should be feared, but they should be respected intensely.
Yeah. Whereas it's possible to take 10 Liberty Caps and just have a jolly good laugh with the men.
Exactly.
You know, you don't have to deal with any shit, you know, all that kind of stuff.
But before we sign off, is there, if folks want to keep up to date with developments in Scotland or with the research group, where do they go? How can they find out more information or keep up on what's happening?
Yeah, well, I best to just Google Scottish Psychedelic Research Group. And then we have a contact form where you can add your name, and we'll add you to an email list. And then we don't really send out monthly newsletters. So really it would be, and also, so most of the emails we send out are either invitations to events. So obviously in America that wouldn't, but it'd still be good for you to keep your eyes on that. And then also research participants. So people contact us wanting to do interviews with folk and stuff like that, or just anything of interest. But we don't But yeah, we don't send much out. And then otherwise, there's also PICTS, Psychedelic Integration Community.
Is it in Scotland?
Scotland. Treatment,
Okay.
yeah. Yes,
Okay,
it's called PICTS.
Okay, that's enough to search. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Anna Ross, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of In the Revival. I'm grateful for your mission and the work you're doing. Keep the faith.
Thank you. Thank you.